least the next 10 weeks. We're going to call that season 1. We're here to answer any and all ad questions you have. We're here to talk about what we're seeing work, talk about things happening in the broader ad space and marketing strategy in general. So what you can do is in the description of this Facebook Live, and if you're on our email list, we'll also share it. We share a Google form where you can opt in just to answer. You don't have to give us your email if you don't want, but any questions you have about Facebook ads, ads in general, digital marketing, send them there. We go through that. We grab the most similarly asked questions and we talk about them every Wednesday at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, right here on Facebook Live and YouTube. So let's get into today's topics. We had 4 kind of key topics, questions that were asked, along with kind of what we're also seeing happen right now in the Facebook ads marketplace. So let's talk about that. So the 4 topics we're going to cover today, besides any questions that might pop up as we go through this. And by the way, you can ask questions on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube, on Facebook if you're watching the Facebook Live, ask it right there. If we don't get to it today, we'll make sure to get to it next week, same time on Wednesday. So the first topic we're going to cover is go through what we're seeing right now, all of our successful clients. What do they have in common with what they're doing with ads? There's one thing we're noticing, especially in the last 6 months, and you'll notice a trend that with everything happening on Facebook, with Apple's privacy updates for iOS, a lot is changing in Facebook around what works, what we need to do to make it work. And so we're noticing a trend right now that a lot of successful clients have. We're also going to talk about unique insights we're seeing right now on Facebook ads. So jumping off that point, number 1 is things, and this we might talk about every week because there's always different things we're learning from our client accounts, but what's working right now, what used to work maybe isn't working now, and share with you so you can test it if you're running your own ads. Would love to hear from you too. If you've tested some of these things, whether it's campaign structure, audience targeting, different types of ad creative, would love to hear what you're seeing work because there's often broader trends at play. Number 3 that we're going to talk about today, it's what you're missing. A little bit of a typo there. What you're missing, AEM. So that is the aggregated event measurement tool. So that is what came out of the Facebook privacy, Apple privacy updates for Facebook. You have to verify your domain, prioritize your events. And we're seeing a lot of prospects and new clients coming in that either don't have it set up at all, or the events they are trying to optimize for aren't prioritized. And so while they might be seeing success, they're missing a lot of additional success just because they're not getting all their events. And the last thing we're going to talk about is that crazy Facebook name change. What it means for Facebook, what it means for marketing in general, and where Facebook's headed. Some interesting things have come out since the original announcement, so we'll get into all of that. But first, let's dive into the first topic, which is what successful clients have in common. And again, this is a big generalization, right? Can't speak for every client all the time. But one thing, we've noticed, this has been true forever on Facebook, but we really noticed a divergence, 4 to 6 months ago when the iOS changes came out. And what happened is Facebook lost a lot of data. If people opt out of iOS tracking, even if you set up all of the AEM, aggregated event measurement tool device, you set up all your events, you prioritize them. If people opt out, only the highest level priority event comes back into Facebook. So that means you're starting to miss data. And even then, there's still attribution loss because Facebook now only gets 7 days instead of 28 days of data. And so while this has always worked well for clients, we saw a big divergence. Clients that weren't selling something initially seem to have worse results from Facebook than if they were selling something. So if you're just doing a launch model, not selling something evergreen, doesn't have to be your main offer, but selling things evergreen seems to have helped clients maintain consistent results. And it did this, we think, for a couple of reasons. One is it kept giving Facebook consistent data around who is purchasing, what that ideal audience looks like. So even though Facebook had less data, they were getting consistent data and being able to kind of still try and target the right people. Whereas if you're just doing lead gen and then launching, or you're taking a break from promoting sales, it caused more sporadic results. Also, this let clients have more cushion, because if they had multiple offers and were selling lower price offers up front with their ads, they were able to supplement or cover their ad spend with those initial sales offers. So that gave them more room to test, to explore different audiences, to make the adjustments. Whereas clients who weren't selling something saw costs go up, didn't have the data, or didn't know, had less room to really keep spending because they were not making that immediate income back. And this has always been true. If you're selling something and not just doing lead gen, that helps yourself or your ad team figure out what audiences are not just getting you the cheapest leads, but getting you sales, which is what you really care about and what we care about. And so an example would be if you have free opt-in offers, or you have an evergreen webinar, and then you're offering a sale after the webinar or on the thank you page for the freebie offer. Facebook was, we still optimize for those leads, and Facebook's going to go find them, the least expensive leads possible. But then we can see, even though we don't have perfect attribution, we can still see which audiences are actually driving more sales. And it isn't always the audience that generates the least expensive lead. And so this really helps us grow your list with buyers, find better audiences. And these clients that are always selling something have had more consistent results over the last 6 months. So it's definitely something to focus on. The days of just doing lead gen in between launches really seems to be something that isn't going to be the path forward anymore. So we really recommend trying to sell something. Other unique things we're seeing on Facebook. So this is heading into topic number 2. This is something, if you have more questions on this, we can cover this every week. There's always interesting things that are new. But right now, what jumped out, and this has been going on since the iOS changes, CPMs are up on average for almost all clients, but not everyone. So it's not a blanket statement, but if you average CPMs, they're higher. Facebook's reported, I think, increased costs of like 25% on their last earnings call. If you're not totally familiar with CPMs, it technically is cost per mil, which is cost per 1,000 impressions. That's a typical ad metric for any ad platform. The reason it's important is that's what you're actually bidding on when you place an ad. Facebook is going out to bid for you to have your ad shown, and you're bidding based on how much you're willing to spend to get in front of 1,000 people, no matter what your objective is. Facebook does this all for you behind the scenes in their auction. But higher CPMs mean if nothing else changes, if your link click-through rate's the same, if your landing page conversion rates are the same, if everything's the same, your costs will go up. So if everything's the same and CPMs go up 25%, it means it costs you 25% more to get the same results. And so we're seeing that for a lot of clients. And sometimes we're seeing shockingly high CPMs out of nowhere for no reason. This is also happening a lot with warm audiences and retargeting. We're now seeing some retargeting audiences cost a lot more than cold audiences, which hasn't been the case for a long time. So it's definitely making things more difficult. There are strategies you can do to lower CPMs, but the first thing you have to do is pay attention. Are your CPMs higher now than they were? If you're noticing campaigns that have always had success, if they've gone up in cost, compare your metrics. If link click-through rate, landing page conversion rate, if those are the same and just CPMs have gone up, it might not be anything specific to your offer that you need to change. You might need just to try different creative, different audiences. Bigger audiences can help with CPMs. So instead of a 1% lookalike, try a 5, try a 10, try broader audiences. Typically, the larger, broader audiences will cost less. And if Facebook can still optimize and have the algorithm work for you, you can still get some very cheap costs. Even if your landing page conversion rate and link click-through rate drop because the targeting isn't as good, if your CPMs are cheap enough, it will make up for it. So something to work on, something to try if you're noticing higher costs, look at your CPMs. We're also seeing now, and this is related back to the iOS changes, and we've seen this pretty consistently now on all our clients over the last 6 months, exclusions are causing problems. So we're seeing, whereas before you might want to have exclusions to really have a targeted audience, maybe exclude from your cold audiences all leads, all buyers, site visitors, and just try and get as cold as possible. We're seeing when you add in a lot of exclusions that it causes your CPMs to rise. This is especially true with retargeting. So if you're trying to get very perfect in your warm audience retargeting, so trying to hit, all site visitors, minus your email list, minus new leads, minus social engagers, that's causing higher costs. So one thing to look at is just trying to group your warm audiences together and letting Facebook optimize for you within there to find what converts best. It's not perfect, but retargeting in general is hurt anyway with all this data loss, because people who opt out of iOS tracking now, you're not going to be able to retarget them like you used to. And so making bigger audiences, combining warm audiences, that can help as well. So those are a couple of unique specific things that you can try. Would love to hear if there's anything weird you've been seeing in your account that hasn't always been there the last couple months. Be as specific as possible. So if you fill out our form, email us, comment, give us some details so we can try and troubleshoot it. And we'll do that on the next call because the next live here, because there is a lot of unique things happening on the platform now, and a lot of things that used to work aren't, and a lot of things that have never worked well are starting to work. So we're always testing and trying new things, and we'd love to hear what you're having issues with. And if you've tried something that works, we'd love to hear that too. All right, let's move on. A little more technical. Don't want to get too into it because it's pretty boring for most people unless you enjoy running ads. But a quick overview, the aggregated event measurement tool. Hard for me to say. I always say aggravated because it's so aggravating. This is the new tool where you verify your domain, and then you go in and for your domain, you tell Facebook what your priorities of pixels are. Now, the reason this happens is with the iOS privacy updates, Facebook can only track 8 events. And you prioritize them because even if someone opts out of iOS tracking, you get back 1 event, your highest priority. So most of the time, highest priority is purchase. Then maybe you'd have checkout, add to cart, leads, complete registration, something like that. So if someone opted in for a freebie, then on the same day opted in for a webinar, same day hit the checkout and bought something, all on the same day, and they opted out of iOS tracking, only the purchase would come back into your account. And that only happens if you've set up the AEM correctly. And this is found in the events manager and inside your ads manager. You prioritized your events and you verified the domain that you're sending traffic to. And so what we're seeing is a lot of prospects we talk to, a lot of prospects we help, a lot of new clients are coming in, and either it's not fully set up, or the events aren't prioritized, or their domain isn't verified, or all of their domains aren't verified. And so we have clients and we've seen prospects who still have success because they have a good offer and they're getting some data back that's letting them optimize, but they're missing a ton of data and a ton of attribution. And sometimes you're not even able to run ads unless you have this set up the right way. So highly recommend you dig into that. Make sure all of your events are prioritized the way you want, the way you think is best. And make sure any domain where you're going to be sending traffic, or even if you're not sending direct traffic, if people are getting there after you sent them somewhere, make sure it's verified so that you can at least track some of that data later. So that's a huge thing people are missing right now. For the most part, everyone has some of it done, but not everyone has really gotten it totally figured out. So really recommend you spend some time getting this cleaned up. It'll help you a lot. Just as Facebook's losing data, you want to get as much as you can into Facebook just to help your own pixel and the algorithm figure out what works best for you. If you have questions on that, we can talk more, but don't want to get too technical since I'm not trying to bore everybody here on a Wednesday. All right, let's dig in. I've been going through these fast, but that's what these are for, kind of fast topic hits. Facebook's name change. We'll be sharing after this presentation and this live a great article from the Stratechery newsletter. It's a great tech site about, kind of all things tech from a very business strategic standpoint. Ben Thompson's the writer, if you don't know of him, but he's covered Facebook, Google, all these major tech companies for years and has some very interesting and unique insights about what they're doing, what they should be doing, what they're missing. And he had some great insights about Facebook's name change. For those of you that don't know, Facebook announced they're doing something similar to what Google did, where they're making a holding company changing that name, and that'll be the name of the company going forward. So Facebook will now be known as Meta, META. It's already on all their apps. If you log into Instagram, it says product by Meta. Facebook itself is still Facebook because it now exists underneath the Meta brand. But in this article I share, Ben Thompson goes through some details of it that go beyond why this is not just a name change. It's a lot more. It's a change in direction, strategy for Facebook. Could be very positive, could be very negative long-term, depending on how they execute. But if you're confused why they call it Meta, the reason is Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook are going all in on the idea of the metaverse. If you're not familiar with that term, it's something that's been kind of kicking around for a long time, but really only picking up steam the last few years. The way to think of it is a world where all our primary interactions are digital, digital first. People think this means like the movie or book Ready Player One. You log in and your whole life is online. It's not quite that. It's not just VR. It can also be augmented reality, digital currencies like Bitcoin, basically everything we do becoming digitized. And Facebook sees this as the future, that this is happening, this is coming, it's already happening. Just because we think of it as strapping on that headset doesn't mean that that's what the metaverse, will only be. Facebook's talked about working on their own augmented reality glasses and ways to interact with the world beyond just your phone. And so in Ben Thompson's article, he talks about how Facebook missed the mobile revolution, and that they weren't really even designed for it. The way Facebook considers themselves, they're about organizing human interaction with people's first principles. That's Facebook's term. Basically taking our offline friendships and relationships and they put them online. That was what Facebook originally did. And that still is part of their ethos. And phones weren't really about human to human connection. It was more about making work easier, making doing things easier, right? That's how smartphones work. That's how all the apps work. And so I'm paraphrasing from this article I'm going to share, but Ben Thompson says Facebook missed mobile because they weren't set up to succeed on mobile. Whereas in this metaverse future where we're much more interacting digitally and doing everything digitally, it is about opting in and connecting with people digitally and experiencing life more digitally, whether we realize it or not, right? Digital currencies and everything else. And so he doesn't say Facebook, this is a good plan necessarily, but he explains the vision more beyond just weird name change. Facebook thinks we should all be in Oculus VR for our lives. So it's interesting, and it's a big bet by Facebook. I think they set aside $10 billion a year to focus on this and build out products and build out what the future looks like for the metaverse. And so as in people who invest in Facebook, that could be good or bad, depending on if you think they succeed or not. As far as Facebook ads are still the main revenue driver for Facebook. They're doing everything they can to make ads perform better after some chaos, after the iOS changes. And so Facebook still needs ads, and it needs people to show up and enjoy Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp so they can keep having people come use ads. So that's not changing anytime soon. This is much more a long-term view of what Facebook sees the world and how it's going to get organized. But it's an interesting article that I thought explains some more of the strategy behind what Facebook did, but outside of some of the funnier, crazier headlines. So thought I'd share that. It's an interesting perspective. We all hope Facebook is still really focusing on making the current experience as good as possible for people and the ad platform better. We all wish they'd have a little bit more improved customer support for clients spending a lot of money. We're always fighting that, but this is outside of that. Meta is about what Facebook sees as the next step, as the next really direction, internet to mobile to this metaverse. So it's an interesting article. If you all have thoughts on it, or thought they should have had come up with a better name, we'd love to hear it. But that's it. That's the chat for this week. Any questions that popped up either on YouTube or Facebook, we'll grab them. We'll answer you next week. Feel free to keep commenting, though, throughout the week as you watch this. We'll always check and add those questions so that we'll cover it on next week. But join us again, 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, every Wednesday for the next 10 weeks. So I'll see you next Wednesday.